Hey Eric, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you great. Can you hear me?
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us today. Happy to have you. I think this is a topic that a lot of people are interested in. Um, I know it's something that you've talked about quite a bit already. If you are tuning in for the first time, this is the Earned Media Show, and we talk about all aspects of generating organic traffic. And today we're going to talk about protecting organic traffic with Charles Taylor. He is the former or a former SEO from Fox News and has a lot of experience with enterprise, has worked with a number of other enterprise organizations as well. And today we're going to talk about migrating a site and preserving your rankings. If you're not an SEO, if you're just like a marketing person and you hire SEOs, you probably know that rank is partially determined by how many links you have coming to you from other websites. And so, each link goes to a specific page on your site. And so if you want to update your site maybe to a new content management system, maybe you want to move to Shopify, or you want to move to WordPress, or you want to move to Magento, but you don't want to orphan all those links that you had coming to those pages. How do you do that? Like, how do you move and preserve your rankings? So that's what we're going to talk about today with Charles. Charles, thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot for having me, Eric. It's great to talk to you again.
Yeah. So hey, before we get in it, you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. My name's Charles Taylor. As you mentioned, I've been doing enterprise SEO for quite a while now. I got into SEO around 2005, 2004. Last 10 years, I've been working for almost exclusively enterprise sites. So just recently, the last 3.5 years, I've been with Fox Corporation. Before that, I was with Verizon for about 5.5 years. I was with LexisNexis, Martin Hubble. Did a lot of work in the legal space with them for several years. Worked for e-commerce sites, so I've had a nice broad sense of experience, which I've really been able to pull on at each of my next positions. And now I'm out on my own. I think I've had enough of corporate life for a little while, and I'm gonna see how it is on the other side.
Cool. So let's jump into it. Like, I guess the biggest question is like, how do I migrate my website to a new domain without losing SEO rankings?
Yeah, so there's a lot to an answer like that, obviously, but I think the key is to make sure that you go in with a strategy. Too often, folks will say, "Well, I'll just bring up this new site, create a bunch of 301s, and then I'm done," and kind of walk away from it. And it's really a lot more involved than that. You've got a whole planning process you have to go through. You have to make sure you know exactly what the status of your current site is, both index wise and technical issue wise. Then, yes, you will have to have 301 redirect set up, but you've got to monitor that process too. You've got to make sure, is Google accepting this change? Is Google swapping their rankings from the old site to the new site, or the old architecture to the new architecture? And then once you're done, you have to maintain. I know Google's even come out and said, "Oh, you can get rid of those 301s when you don't need them anymore." That's not really true. You always have to be a little careful of everything that Google says, because they tell you things from their point of view and not necessarily from the point of view of a business owner or an SEO.
So, hey, if you're listening and you just heard 301 and you're freaking out, don't worry, we're going to get into that a little bit more. But I guess there's two kind of migrations, right? One migration would be you stay at the same domain, but you change to a new content management system.
Mm-hmm.
The other would be you actually move from one .com to another .com. And so would you handle those differently?
No, so there's actually lots of different kinds of migrations that can take place. Think of it like this. Anytime you change the URL structure of your site, even if you're going removing a backslash and saying, okay, none of my pages have a trailing slash, or all of my pages are going to end with .html or some structure, or everything's going to go into categories. Everything else is staying the same, but now all our pages sit in different categories. Those are all migrations. So it's not even necessarily changing domains or changing CMSs. It could just be trying to reorganize your site. Anytime you change the URL structure in any way, shape, or form, that's a migration. Um, so each one of those would be handled a little differently, but the same process really The same process would be required for all of it. Is you have to allow Google to discover the new stuff through the old stuff.
Right, because a link is basically an address. It's a unique address to a page. And so you have the domain, then you have a slash, you might have a category, then you have a slash, you might have a page name, or you might just have the domain, a slash, and go right into the page name. But if that gets changed in any way, that could upset your rankings because the links get orphaned. But don't people just redirect the old link to the new link? I mean, isn't that what most people do?
So yes, and that's how most people end up going wrong. So what they'll do is they'll set up a redirect. The new page, the old page will go away, and you'll have nothing but the new page. The dilemma is Google's not aware that the old page has gone away. It finds the new page before it knows the old page has gone away, and so now Google thinks there are two different pages about the exact same thing or very similar things on your web. And then you start getting into issues where the duplicate content filter starts coming into play and you start cannibalizing yourself. And the search engine just doesn't know what to do with it. You're absolutely right. Every URL is an address. Think of it this way: every URL is an entry in a database for Google. And in that database, they have your URL and they have all the SEO or all the ranking factors next to it. You change that URL, you're starting fresh. It's just like starting a brand new starting a brand new site. So yeah, making any changes, think of it in terms of that database. That database, you're messing with it, and you have to let Google pass that authority properly.
And that's what most people do. They just basically redirect the old URL to the new URL. Now you've got these two pages. Google doesn't know what the difference is between them, and that's why you use this word cannibalization, as though the new page is going to somehow dilute the ranking authority of the old page and vice versa.
Right. Yeah. You have a couple things happening. You have the new page Google knows about. It knows, especially if you're on the same domain, it now thinks there's competing pages on the same domain, but the new page doesn't have any of that authority yet. There's no links pointing to it. Google may not even have seen the 301 redirect yet. So in Google's mind, it's a fresh page. But what often happens is we build out a new site, we create all of our internal structure, we're pointing to this new page. So now Google sees the page, it sees navigation pointing to it, it has an old page still in its database, may not even have noticed it 301 yet because it couldn't crawl it. So
And the
all the authority
301
is sitting on that old
is
page. Yeah.
the 301 is the designation for the redirect from one page to the next, and that's a permanent redirect, right?
Correct, correct. So I'm glad you brought that up. There's lots of different kinds of page statuses that can be out there. Our goals as SEOs, as webmasters, you want Google to go to a page. I should say a page that you want to rank should always return a 200 status. That's the hey, everything's fine. We're all aware of the 404, page not found or file not found. The 300 series are redirects. There's all kinds of redirects, but what you always want to deal with in a migration or anytime you're taking down one page and replacing it with another is you want to do a 301 permanent redirect. What you're telling Google, when Google goes to the old page and sees that 301 status that's pointing to the new page, you're telling Google, hey, this page doesn't exist anymore, only go to this page. It's kind of like changing your phone number, and when someone calls your old phone number, it says this number's out of service, but then redirects you to the new number. That's
So I
essentially
know
what it's doing.
you have a lot of experience sort of helping big organizations migrate either their entire web infrastructure or to a new domain and preserving rankings. So why don't you sort of walk us through the key steps to sort of ensuring a smooth website migration?
Sure. So I'll start with so I've done everything from just changing CMS systems, moving things from subdomains to subdirectories, moving things from subdirectories to subdomains, bringing sites into other sites. The biggest one I did was moving Verizon Wireless into Verizon. When I was working there, I was in charge of that process. And there was a whole corporate endeavor to say, okay, now we're one company, we're not two different companies anymore. We want to have one website. So the first thing we had to do is get an inventory of everything on the old site, on what I would call the legacy site, the site that's going to the new site. Now this wasn't a one-to-one. This was one going over and making two. So we had a Verizon.com already, we had a Verizon Wireless, and now Verizon Wireless was coming over to live on Verizon.com. So we had to pass all that authority from that highly authoritative domain to this other domain. And so what we end up doing is the first thing you have to do is create an inventory of everything on the old site. And we also need to inventory everything that Google thinks is on the site. So it's not just what's currently on the site, it's anything the search engine still thinks is on the site. You need to know about it. You need to make a plan. Are we going to be redirecting these? Are we going to be maintaining them? In this case, because we're changing domains, nothing's being maintained. Are we going to let the page die? Is it a page that shouldn't exist anymore? That will happen occasionally. Then once you come up with the plan, then we need to map it out in the new system. How is it going to live in the new system on the new site? And then we're going to have to start moving the site over. And we did that in sections. We did one section 1 week and then another section 2 weeks later. So it doesn't have to be on a large enterprise site. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can do sections of a site at a time, and it worked just fine.
How many pages roughly do you remember were on the Verizon site?
Hundreds of thousands of pages. And quite
So,
honestly, Google knew about over 1 million pages. Even though all those pages didn't exist anymore, we had to deal with that.
so I guess you're creating this big spreadsheet that's just got like each row is a different URL.
Yep.
And then I guess you're getting the export from something like a crawl of the site, a
So
screaming frog call. But then you're also getting it from other places because you said pages that Google knows about that may not be on the site anymore.
exactly. So we don't rely, I never rely on one resource. Even if you have a site that's only 10 pages maximum, I still don't just go to one source of truth. I will do a crawl screaming frog and get all the list. I'll then go on to tools like SEMrush and Ahrefs and see what pages do they show links for. I'll go into Search Console and I'll get everything that's had impressions, not clicks, but impressions for the past 16 months. I'll look at our analytics, whether it's something like Adobe or Google Analytics. Everything that's gotten traffic, every page that's gotten traffic in the last year to 2 years. I want this massive list, and then I got to dedupe it, and then I got to take that big list and I got to recrawl it again to find out what's alive and what's not alive. Because often there's pages, especially on a large site like an enterprise site, there's often pages that have links that Google's going to regularly that are dead. Well, we have to adjust for that because if we don't care for it, Google's going to keep trying to hit that old domain forever, or almost forever.
So when we started, we said that one of the ways that Google determines which pages to rank is based on inbound links from other websites to a page. And you said something very interesting. You said when you're making this list, this inventory, you go to a tool like Ahrefs or a tool like SEMrush to see which ones have links. Now, if you're dealing with a site that's got hundreds of thousands of pages, does that mean you're going to sequence it by handling those pages with the most links first?
So I look at there's a couple different metrics we look at to determine when we prioritize our pages. We look at links. I also look at impressions and I look at visits or clicks, depending upon what metric, whether I'm bringing it from Search Console, bringing it from analytics. Because we have pages that'll have links that have been 404'd for years. And something's got to be done. And that actually, see, that's a great
404
opportunity.
means page cannot be found.
Right, the
So,
page
so
is
the
dead.
link is still in Google's index, but it can't be found.
And the current site is bleeding authority. It's losing authority that you can now recover for the new site. So not only can it be a migration, be a way of protecting yourself, but if you go through this whole process, you could actually end up with a stronger site coming out of it than you had going in because you've recovered all these broken links and all these dead pages that nobody realized were even dead. So we'll look at not only things that are getting traffic and impressions, but I also look at what's getting links. And we have to have a plan for everything. In my mind, if it's getting impressions and traffic or links, we have to redirect using a 3-1 redirect, permanent redirect, all of them. When you start getting to the pages that either aren't getting any traffic and or don't have links, then you don't have to necessarily redirect them. I typically do because I want to send the signal to Google that everything is moved. I don't want Google to think that some stuff's been left behind.
You hear guys talking about this idea of edge work, the idea that you would use like a CDN and do the redirection through the CDN to somehow insulate yourself. Is there anything to that?
No, that's so you're not. It's not really. The problem isn't going to be on your technical stack side for the most part, although we will get into that in a few seconds since you bring it up. The problem is typically on Google's end. When you make a change to your structure, or domain or whatever, you're going to confuse Google because the search engine, again, it has just a list and you've just now changed it. So what I've found most helpful is if you can, when you're doing a migration, if you can maintain the same URL structure, then you can just start using wildcard redirects. And I love wildcard redirects, and we'll define those in a few seconds. But a wildcard redirect means you don't have to have a redirect for every single URL. You can just say, hey, if you go to the, let's just say, support directory, anything in the support directory is now sitting over here in a directory named support, or maybe wireless support, or maybe something else. So that way, you don't have to be, the SEO doesn't have to be perfect. If you miss something, it's okay. You've got this wild card. And that's what the wild card is doing. It's saying anything that's here will now be here. So anything that's support slash whatever is now over here in wireless support slash whatever. And that's a good way of protecting yourself from missing anything, especially in an enterprise scenario. It also
So
makes for redirects. It also makes for shorter redirect lists, which your server folks will thank you for.
so you like this idea of wildcarding a subdirectory, not the top level domain.
I typically do it by subdirectory level or subdomain level. I know, well, subdirectory level, because it gives you a little more control. Even if they're all essentially doing the same thing, I like giving ourselves flexibility in the future if we decide to make a change. So I don't want to do something in a migration that restricts what someone can do in the future with the new site.
Now, you mentioned that it's not necessarily a good idea to just redirect the old page to the new page, which is what most people do. And I know you have some other way of doing it. So walk us through this concept of
Yeah.
the
So,
canonical concept.
yeah. So often what I'll do is this is especially helpful if you are. This is really helpful if you're moving, if you're doing some kind of a move where both the old and the new can be live at the same time. So let's say we're going from domain one to domain two. What we'll do is we'll make a copy of domain one at domain two. We will do canonical tags from domain one to domain two. We won't
Now,
do
just
any.
for those who don't know, what is a canonical tag?
A canonical tag is a link that you put in the head section of the page, so it's in the code that users can't see, but it's a link in the head section of the page that's telling Google, hey, this page is the same as this other page. And so you're basically telling Google, giving Google a way to consolidate all of its authority. If you see page A and we're consolidating over to page B, Google, don't worry about page A. All the love, quote unquote love from Google should go to page B.
And page A and page B can be at different domains.
Different domains, different directories, different everything, or very,
So
very similar.
before you even 301 direct, you're basically going to use the canonical to reference the new page on the new site before you 301 direct it,
If,
redirect it.
if we can, we don't always get a chance to do that because it depends on the structure, but I like doing that. This also gives us the opportunity to bring the new site up in what I always call our soft launch or organic launch. So Google can see it, Google can start doing its crawling, but we as webmasters and as SEOs can start testing the new site and make sure, does this work right? Are there any problems? So it gives us a couple weeks to make sure the new site is correct before the rest of the world sees it before it goes to production.
So let's talk about that, just one specific thing. So often when you're developing the new site, before you go live, you have it at a subdomain. So you might have it at staging.mynewdomain.com and then the rest of the page. And then you basically you tell Google, hey, don't index this yet because I'm still working on it. And then when you get rid of the staging.mydomain.com and just go to mydomain.com, that's when you typically tell Google, hey, you can index me now. So walk us through the sequencing of these canonicals. Would you set up the canonicals after you're off the subdomain, or would you set them up on the subdomain and with the no index and then move it all over and release the robots in no index tag?
Yeah, so I wouldn't canonical anything over to a staging subdomain. So staging subdomains, we want to make sure we're keeping those out of Google at all times. So you should, I mean, so that's a whole separate issue. You should always be monitoring the Google index and make sure it's not indexing your staging or dev subdomains. And if it is, get it out of there immediately. So that's just
How?
one warning
How
right
would you
there.
do that? Let's say you find it is doing it. What do you do?
So the simplest thing to do is uh, I'm not a big fan of using the robots.txt because robots.txt does not keep things out of Google if you're linking to it. And once
And that's a
Google,
no index tag.
right, what I would
Right.
typically do is if I find a staging or a dev domain in the index, I'll number one make sure are there any links to it from my live site. Often there are. Someone makes a mistake, they leave an old link in there that they shouldn't have left in there. Now Google finds a new site. I always also make sure that the staging domain should have a blanket no index meta tag on all of its pages. So that's again, it's a little tag in the head section of the page that no one can see but Google. It's telling Google, hey, if you see this page, don't index it. So that's like a little bit of a backup as well. And then you can always go into Search Console and you can request removal for the staging or dev subdomain. And then that's kind of the final step. So I would always have your staging and your dev set up those properties in your search console so you can always keep an eye and make sure Google's not crawling them. And it should always show back a 0, and that's good. Every day that there's nothing there is a good day. So
So after you've got this whole thing going, how long does it take for Google to recognize the new domain and start indexing the new pages?
typically not long at all. It really doesn't take, Google crawls things pretty fast. I know everyone likes to complain that, oh, Google's taking forever to crawl. It actually does crawl things pretty fast. I find that from start to finish, a typical migration, assuming it's not like on a huge enterprise site, but even then when we had but we were doing sections, each section really only took us like a month. I'm in the middle of a migration right this second with a client. We've got about 100 or so pages. The whole process is going to take us about a month again. Doesn't matter whether you're dealing with thousands of pages or 100 pages. Still takes about a month for Google to do that full transfer from I only know about the old site to I'm only looking for the new site now.
Now, from a business standpoint, forget about the technology for a second, but just in simple business language, why bother with all this? I mean, what if it doesn't go right, what could happen?
So the reason why you want to bother with this is you don't want to lose traffic, number one. And not only do you not want to lose traffic, but by going through this process properly, your business won't be impacted in the sense that, so another great example, I'm going through a migration right this second. The client got leads during the migration. So not only were there no traffic, there were no rankings or traffic impact, but there wasn't an impact to the bottom line either. What I have seen, if you don't do your migrations properly, if you're not going through them in a very orderly fashion, I've seen sites lose 50, 60, 70%. A great article just came out in Search Engine Roundtable the other day, and they said the typical migration took 520 some odd days to recover. That's over a year and a half. That's a long time for a business to have to wait for their traffic to return. In my
Right.
world, if you're doing your migration properly, you should have almost no dip or maybe a month or two of 10 to 15% dip. That's really my worst case scenario that I've seen so far.
Right. And I mean, if you're watching this, you probably know about it, what the impact of organic traffic is and why you're in the earned media business. But if you're kind of new to this area, sales on an e-commerce site are going to be a percentage of your traffic. So if your traffic goes down, your sales go down. It's that simple. Or if you're generating leads on your site, those leads are going to be a percentage of all traffic, usually a single digit. Like a single digit conversion rate is actually really healthy. And so, if you're getting 1,000 people to the site and a 2% conversion rate, if that drops down to 1%, then that's less people to sell to or less sales. So that's kind of why we're getting into this.
Yeah, my process for migration is really all about number one, not hurting yourself after the migration, but also I want you to be able to keep doing business during the migration. You can't shut your business down during a migration. That's just not feasible.
So how do I monitor my SEO performance after the migration? Like I've done the migration, it's done. How do I know if it's working?
So what I'll typically do is at the start of a migration, I create a very simple lookup, a very simple Looker Studio report, and I have two
Looker
panels on it.
Studio is a Google product
Yeah.
that operates on Google Analytics GA4 and allows you to create dashboards. So you create dashboards for your client.
Exactly. And you could create a dashboard with Adobe. You could create a dashboard from really anything. I typically just create my dashboard using Google Search Console data. That's the data that Google knows about your site. It's kind of the behind the scenes data. So it's a step more technical than the analytics data because it's only looking at organic data and it's only looking at Google data. But I'll create a dashboard where on one side I'll have the legacy site or legacy directory or whatever it is. On the other panel, I'll have the new site and I'll have impressions, I'll have traffic, and I'll keep a list of the URLs. And what I should be seeing on the legacy site is impressions and traffic going down. And on the new site, impressions and traffic should be going up. And they're going to move pretty much in tandem. And as long as one keeps going down and the other keeps going up, we know we're going in the right direction. And then post migration, I will keep an eye on that because you're never going to purge Google's database of the old URLs immediately. It might take months. So you do keep an eye on it to make sure that it keeps slowly removing pages. If you notice that certain pages keep ranking and or keep getting traffic, then you know something wasn't done right. Maybe you didn't redirect it. Maybe you have a bunch of links pointing to this old page internally and you didn't realize that and you got to fix it. So, it gives you a place, it gives you a good place to go to find things you'll have to do in your post-migration cleanup phase.
There are so many of these vertical industry content management solutions. There are content management solutions for health clubs and for dentists and for lawyers. I mean, there are these niche sort of content management systems that usually are built by a small team of people and maintained by a small team of people. Some of them may be great, but I mean, I've been involved with a lot of clients who have basically hit a wall with these systems and had to move to something supported by a bigger engineering team like Shopify or Magento or WooCommerce. And when that happens, you move to the new platform and you usually do it with a goal like, hey, let's increase conversions by 2%. And we'll know that this migration was successful if we do that. But what happens is you look at the metrics before and you look at the metrics after, which are on different systems, and then you get pushback often from the client who says, well, yeah, we were measuring this system before, it wasn't really accurate because there were all these systems that were bringing us traffic that we didn't measure, and now we're in this one system that shows it all, so I don't really know if we did gain 10%, 2%, it could have just been, that we moved systems. Is there a way to sort of guarantee that you can measure apples to apples before and after a migration?
Yeah, I would. So I would always look at that's one of the reasons why I use impressions. I love using impressions coming out of Google Search Console as a way to really measure things because traffic can be weird. Traffic can change with the seasons. It can change with demand levels, whereas impressions typically stay pretty consistent. That's more of a function of your ranking. Um, so that's one of the things I always like to use. I find it a good
But you hear
barometer.
so
It's
much
not my KPI,
pushback
but it's a
from
barometer. I'm
you
sorry.
hear so much pushback from SEOs about Google Search Console. They say they don't trust. People say they don't trust Google Search Console because it conflicts with so many other Google tools. Like, if you compare Google Search Console data to data from Google Ads to relative volume in search in Google Trends, it's all over the place.
They're all
And you
different
see that,
numbers.
in ads, Google's trying to sort of sell you a block of keywords. And so they'll tell you all the keywords in that cluster have volume, when in fact it's just one or two. Then you go into trends and you see that they're all over the place. Then you go into Google Search Console and, the relative volume does not mirror what you're seeing in Google Trends. So, their cards are not on the table. I mean, it's really unclear. There's no auditing like there was in the old days of, mainstream media where there was an audit bureau of circulation. So, I mean, how do you how can you trust what you're seeing in Google Search Console? I mean, I can trust the sort of broader patterns, but in terms of really hanging my hat on those numbers, I'm skeptical.
So you're absolutely right. I don't hang my hat on those numbers. I know they're not the accurate numbers, but they give me the pattern and they give me the trend that I need. So I use those purely as barometers. It doesn't tell me how much it's raining or how long it'll rain. It's just going to tell me, hey, it's going to rain soon. And that's really that's the point of the barometer. It's letting you know that something's going to happen, but it doesn't give you all the details. It does give you in a few places. Actually, there are several places in Search Console where it gives you quite an insight into how the search engine is handling and working with your site. And that is from a very technical, when you really get into deep technical SEO, crawl settings or crawl stats, that is really, really helpful. Because even if they don't show you all the data, you can see if there's a problem or if there's not a problem. And you can typically see what kind of problem. And then you take that information and you go to the live site with your developers and say, here's what I'm seeing. Let's look at all the pages. Now you can use your own tools, either like a Screaming Frog, or you can use something more robust in terms of like seeing the waterfall of each page to figure out what's actually going on this page. In terms of like traffic and impressions, you're right. You won't compare that. You'll never be able to reconcile that with your analytics or your paid ads. I've worked in organizations where the same section of the site had two different suites of Adobe working on it, and the numbers weren't the same. This was the same site, same company, same suite, but the numbers didn't agree because it all really boils down into when is everything being counted? And that's important to understand when it comes to analytics in general. Are you counting it? Search Console counts it when people click from the search result into your site. Well, that's different from a visit. They're showing someone going from Google to your site. If they don't get to your site for whatever reason, they're still counting that, but an analytics package wouldn't count it, as it shouldn't. So understanding what each of these things are counting is very, very important. So you can understand it's not so much that this number is right or this number is wrong. It's this is what this number is telling me. This is what this number is telling me. It's like the difference between clicks and page views and unique users. They're all similar, but they're not the exact same statistic.
So, working at enterprise organizations, you've obviously had the ability to look right at the server and see what's happening. But small and medium-sized businesses that rely on hosting solutions provided by companies like Magento or, hosted WooCommerce or Shopify, which, in the pandemic absolutely took off because so many smaller manufacturers who were dependent on channel retailers saw their channels disappear, and many of them had to reinvent themselves overnight in e-commerce. And that's really, I think, what led to Shopify's huge growth. I know there was a ton of business helping those companies get set up, but the bummer is, if you're on Shopify, you can't see when when Googlebot is crawling your site because you don't have access to that information. So any tips for small to medium-sized companies that may not have access to their server logs?
Yeah, if you don't have access to your server logs, then the next best thing you can do is, again, going back and looking at the crawl stats in your Google Search Console. Don't forget about Bing. Bing Webmaster Tools, it's still helpful. It's just another metric. It's another tool that's crawling your site and a way to understand how are bots hitting my site? How are bots seeing my site? You can use your own crawling solutions like a Screaming Frog. Those are good too, but that's going to spend time and energy on the site that a bot may not necessarily have. You can also adjust it to get past issues that a bot would potentially have. You can use a lot of the other, again, SEMrush and Ahrefs and a lot of these other SaaS programs out there. A lot of, Botify I know has one where they'll do crawls and whatnot on your site, but then you have the same issue where they're trying to create a crawler that's going to get past all the issues that may hang up a bot. So you never get perfect data. That's why I always try to get data from multiple places. Folks that want to get single point of data, I'm just going to use this system and get all my data from that system. Now you're blind to all these other issues, both good and bad, that are going on. So as an SEO, you need lots of tools in your tool belt, and you need to use them all, even though they overlap a lot of times.
So what are some common mistakes you see that cause rankings to drop after a migration? What are the most common ones?
The most common mistake is not accounting for all of your URLs. Saying these or these are the 20 pages on our site and that's it, and then they redirect those pages and then not anything else. Where Google may know about or think it knows about 50, 60, 70, 100 pages. You've got to account for all of those pages. Another thing that people often do is they decide, oh, no, no, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this page. I don't care about this page. And so they try to ignore it. And so they just leave an error for Google. They don't properly redirect. Even though they're getting rid of it, they're providing a dead end on the old domain for the search engine, and that's no good. Now the search engine thinks there's still something going on out there. The next problem I've seen is, and this is after the migration, is folks being convinced to take down their redirects by server folks and developers who are trying to clean up server logs or clean up server resources or something, and they take down these 301 redirects and they end up hurting themselves because there were still links pointing to those old pages. If you have a link pointing to a page, that 301 redirect needs to stay out there forever. If you don't have a link, then I'll agree. Maybe after a couple of years, you could probably clean it up. But I would still look at your Search Console data. I would look at your log files if you can. I would definitely look at your analytics and make sure that there are not people trying to access these old pages first.
It's really a high anxiety thing to migrate a site because it's almost like, you're putting on a show. You open that curtain, man, and then the show must go on. And so, I mean, I wonder, is there a way to test before you go live to see if there are any potential issues that you're going to wind up getting in trouble with?
That's why I always recommend, if you can, to bring up the new site first and do what I call soft launch or an organic launch. So you bring the site up, and then as an SEO, I could crawl the news. No one's going to it yet. There's no redirect set up. Google doesn't know about it yet, but it is technically live. So I can now crawl it. I can now analyze it just as if it's another SEO site, and I can find problems before they happen. I can then test my 301 redirects. Say, is everything I'm redirecting to, does it exist? Is it okay from an SEO point of view? Are we doing a proper one-to-one, or did we do one to Z or something crazy like that? Did we mess something up someplace? So that's really the stage where you can find a lot of those problems.
Charles, if someone is listening to this and they're getting ready to migrate, or they just need to talk to somebody, need some advice, or maybe they need full-blown, help doing it, how do they get a hold of you?
I'm actually pretty easy to find. If you Google Charles Taylor SEO, you'll find me. I'm all over the place. But they can go to my website, charlestayloronline.com. It's just my name, charlestayloronline.com. But again, if you Google Charles Taylor SEO, you got to throw the SEO in there. Otherwise, you find other Charles Taylors. I've been told it's quite a common name, so you got to put the SEO in there.
Yeah, yeah. And if you're interested in protecting your site against a potential black hat attack, there's a link here where you can download a white paper that explains all the different types of attacks that are out there and what you can do to protect yourself against them. Charles, thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Thanks a lot for having me. This was a lot of fun.